I was born in Vancouver, Washington. I had a very good father, a very good mother, a brother and sister. My father owned a small millwork company. My mother was a wonderful, as they say, housemaker. She was also a frustrated artist. What is unique about us, I believe, and has a lot to do with the way in which I've lived my life, is that I went to public school, so that my brother and sister, we were seen by much of the world as very normal people, except we were also Plymouth Brethren. Plymouth Brethren would be, we were separatists. We were everybody in our assembly. We never used the word church. Were pacifists, except my father in World War II. The most important thing about that is, and it becomes very much a part of this whole story, is that I was always felt separate from everyone else, even though I certainly was welcomed by everybody and we always fit in to the degree that we allowed ourselves to fit in school. My father, I discovered when I was a boy going through a chest of his in the attic of in the smaller house that we grew up in. It was a runner, and I found his medals, and part of me said, I want to be like my father, like every boy in America, everywhere probably. And so I became a good runner in high school, and I set a national high school record, which sent me out into the world. And I had many college scholarships. And at the same time, we grew up. My father did well in his business. We had horses. But I also learned, we also had a very good outdoors Northwest life. But my father also said, a man only needs one match to light a fire. He taught me how to shoot a rifle and how to break it down when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. At the same time, we were very religious. He wanted me to go to West Point, but he also wanted me to be a missionary. So I'm caught between these two worlds as a young man. In college, I had success as a runner, but at the same time I didn't. I discovered girls, went out, drank alcohol. All of this worked against me. I didn't get along with my coach. And ultimately I left. I was at the University of Oregon, which is the main track and field school in America at that time. I think it probably still is. It was the most important thing in my life. That was more important to me than studying, although I felt I did study hard. As a result of the problems I had with my coach, I felt that I had not reached the level as an athlete that I could, even though I was Pan American team and 7th ranked 800 meter runner in the world. I felt in some ways that I had failed. And after college, I did not make the Olympic team that year when I thought I could. In many ways, I felt I should have. I went to my father and I said, I'm leaving the country. I'm going to hitchhike. I'm going to hitchhike through Europe. My mother cried. My father gave me a camera. And I made my way hitchhiking, like so many Americans do, through Europe. And I went down, made my way through France, and then down through Spain. And I reached the Mediterranean. And I looked across the border, or the Mediterranean, and I said, I'm not finished yet. There's something on the other side where I have to go. And for the first time, I began to feel there's something inside of me searching for what we will call the wild. And I took a small boat lying low in the water with about 3 or 4 other people, reached Tangier, X number of hours later. I don't know how long it took. And the next day I heard for the first time the Muslim call to prayer. And what is this? What does it mean? And it drew me in. And I felt I had to hitchhike across North Africa. At the same time as I was standing on the road with a fire in the barrel on this highway that took you across North Africa, which where I was told, which is where I should go to hitchhike across, where there were a lot of truck drivers would meet in the morning. And a fire was burning in the barrel, and I heard the call of prayer again somewhere in the desert, and I wanted to go down there. There was something about growing up in a very religious environment, feeling that I had failed the God of my youth, and that when I was in Tangier, the God of my youth was calling me. There was something deeply religious always within me. It was bred into me as a boy, as water makes a flower grow. It was the nourishment of our youth, that we were separate from everyone else. We were deeply religious as well as being completely a part of the world, but that became so much a part of me and becomes very much a part of my life. And as I hitchhiked across North Africa, it was during Ramadan, when Muslims don't eat during the day from sunrise to sunset. I heard men say Inshallah, and I didn't know what that meant but it said God willing. And I said, that's just how we talked in church when I was a boy. I kept going. Finally, thought I would make my way towards the Holy Land and find a new God there. But as I made my way across, I decided to hitchhike. Well, I was hitchhiking, and I got to Algiers. From Algiers, I made my way to Tunisia, and then from Tunis, I decided instead to take a boat across. And I remember at night, I ran to. It was a boat. One boat was leaving once a week to Sicily. I ran, jumped over climbed over a fence, jumped on the boat as it made its way as it was leaving the harbor. The next day we arrived in Palmero, Sicily, and I hitchhiked up through Italy and down into Yugoslavia and across to Turkey. And it was in Turkey where I got a letter from my father at Poste Restante, which said, Poste Restante at that time, this is all the digital world, was in any post office in any major city in Europe, perhaps here, and you can do the same thing in America, you would just write, Jere Van Dyk, Poste Restante, Istanbul, and the letter would get to you. And there was a letter from my father. You've been drafted. You have to come home. My father was in the Marine Corps in World War II. I could not say no to my father. And at the same time, it was during the war, and I haven't gone into this yet, but Vietnam, very mixed emotions about it. Didn't want to ever disappoint my father. At the same time, I certainly didn't support the war. And I was in the what we call, I forget what we call it now, youth hostel in Istanbul. And I was sitting in my bunk, and I had maps in front of me, and I was planning my trip up through Eastern Europe, part of the Soviet bloc, during the time of the Cold War, where I would go, and then I would make my way to Luxembourg, where I had to buy an airline ticket, where I had flown over on Air Luxembourg, which was the cheapest way to go to Europe then, and make my way back and go home and into the Army. And at that time, men and women, boys and girls were kept separate in all youth hostels. So I'm sitting there planning my trip back, and this woman comes in, and she has high leather Cretan boots, and she had a beautiful scarf on, and she had this leather coat, which was the type that you could buy in Istanbul then, that were very popular with hitchhikers. And she said, "Where's Lacey?" And she wasn't supposed to be in there where the men or boys were. And he turned over in his bunk and said, "I'm Lacey." And she said, "I saw your sign downstairs looking for writers to go to Asia. I want to go with you." And he said, "Well, be downstairs at 8 o'clock the following morning." And she left, and I looked over to him and I said, "Do you have any more room?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Be downstairs at 8 o'clock in the morning." It was because of that woman. And so we left. There were about 6 of us. We took out the back seat of a Volkswagen, and we made our way across Turkey. And as we were traveling across, I saw soldiers working, trying to clear snow from the roads, and I said, oh, the military can be a force for good in the world. And I appreciated it, and I saw a lot of poverty on that trip, what America could do, and had done for me. And I finally, we got, as we were traveling across, I became closer to this woman. And as he said, well, Lacey, who was going, he was AWOL from the Navy. He was going to India to try to earn money or make money by buying gems and coming back to Europe and selling them. He said, well, the trip will be easy. We make our way across Turkey. Iran is easy. Afghanistan's a little, that's a little different. I go, Afghanistan, it's different. Oh. There's something that clicked inside of me. At the Turkish-Iranian border, I knew I had to turn around and go home, and I went home and went into the Army. But I held on to that belief that there's something romantic, something exciting, something different from Afghanistan, from the rest of the world. So I was in the Army for 2 years, and I got out, and I went to graduate on the GI Bill. I went to graduate school in Paris. I was very serious about academics then. I was still running, and I became more successful as an athlete. Made the U.S. national team and carried the American flag in the closing ceremonies of the U.S.-Russia track meet during the height of the Cold War, which was the second most important track meet besides the Olympics during that time, even more important because of the politically. So I finished. I was running hard. At the same time, I also had not forgotten Afghanistan. And finishing the last day of school in Paris, I saw my name on the wall posted outside that I had passed my classes. I was very happy. I went and I joined about a half a dozen friends of mine from different countries. And we sat in a cafe. It was at the Institute of Political Studies. It was just down the street from the Institute. And we went around, as young men do, the table, and what were we going to do next in life? Well, this person was going to be a banker, this person was going to be a journalist, this person was going to be an art historian. And I said, I want to go to Afghanistan. Just like that, out of the blue, it came up. So what I did was, I was still running a bit. I went to Northern Europe to earn money on the international track and field circuit. And I came back, and I called my parents. And I said, I'd like Cody, my younger brother, who was just finishing high school, to join me. I wanted to drive a car across Asia. I want to go to Afghanistan. And to this day, my brother and I do not know why our mother said yes. My father also gave his approval. And at that time, you could buy an old Volkswagen or even a Mercedes in Europe, and young people were doing this, and a lot of older people were also, and you could drive it across Asia and sell it for a profit and use that money to fly back home, and maybe you'd have money left over. And so I bought an old Volkswagen. My brother flew over. We actually met in Germany, and we began to travel on what I had started to travel on by going in Istanbul, which is what today is called, in retrospect, the hippie trail. And we started in what is called the pudding shop, where if you ever saw a movie called Midnight Express about a drug dealer, American drug dealer who spent 10 years in prison, that's exactly where I started when I first went on my trip with Lacey and the woman and the other Europeans who were with us. And we drove across, and we began to drive across Asia, and we got in it. We were crossing eastern Iran. One night, a horse, out of nowhere, it was a white horse too, jumped, came across the field, jumped in the air. Somehow we had panicked him, and he fell in the front of the Volkswagen, came down, kept running away, but the Volkswagen was now destroyed. And it could still drive, but there was no window, it was all broken. Fortunately, as you know, or may recall, engines in the back of the Volkswagen, so we were okay. And we crawled along, and we got to Mashhad, and it took the rest of my money that I had to repair the car. Here, 2 foreigners, 2 Europeans. We're out there in the middle of eastern Iran. Let's charge these people a lot of money, and they did. And so we got to the Afghan border. And I looked across the border and I said, this is my Lawrence of Arabia land. I had seen the movie of Lawrence Arabia, and that romance of that, to me, the romance of that type of life and the romance of Afghanistan all came up to me. I could ride a camel caravan and disappear into the mist. There was no border, there was nothing there at all, no fence, nothing. And then we drove in, got into the country, got a visa there at the border, drove to Kandahar. Kandahar we drove up to Kabul, and as we approached Kabul, I found myself saying, this is Shangri-La. Why did I say that? Where did it come from? I have no idea. We stayed there as long as we could. We ran out about no more than a month. We ran out of money. I sold the car in the Khyber Pass for the romance of it all. But my brother on a bus, there were these hippie buses that with the money I had made in selling the car, and he made his way back ultimately home. An American school teacher who I met there gave me enough money, and it was cheap. The cheapest way back was to fly from Kabul to Moscow back to Paris, and where I still had left my things. I had a $12 full-length wolf coat that I bought in the bazaar in Kabul, and never forgot Afghanistan. I went to work. I got my first job, very serious young man now, as an aide to the junior senator from Washington State, Senator Henry Jackson, and from 74 to 77. And then I left because I didn't like politics. I felt that it would corrupt me. This part of my religious upbringing felt that I helped my brother get a summer job, and I felt I was cheating in some way. I was using my position to help him get a job. And I didn't feel that was right. And so because of my athletic background and the rise of jogging at that time, a friend of mine and I, and actually started with his girlfriend, came up with the idea of writing a book on running and athletics and recreation in Europe for tourists. And so we wrote a book called A Runner's Guide to Europe, and didn't make any money, but it was my entry into, I used athletics, sports, this is my entry into the world of journalism. I was still living in Washington, D.C. at the time. I went to a party and a man said there's a program, there was a newspaper strike in New York, there's a program called Special Edition, they're looking for people, why don't you do that? And so this is what I'm going to do next. This has come to me. It was sort of God was coming to me, providing this opportunity for me. And I went up there and I became a commentator, a sports political commentator, using my background in Washington as well as my athletic background. And then in 1979, I was watching television. I saw the Soviet tanks enter Kabul, and I was at home with my parents in Vancouver, and I said, I have to return. I've got to go. There was no question about it. And at that time, nobody had gone from the U.S. A Dutch freelance journalist had written articles that the Washington Post reported and put on the front page, and that instilled the desire even more for me to go. And I went to the Washington Post. They said, one woman said, how do I know? Because I work for the center, you don't work for the CIA. And I said, where did that come from? And I made 12 phone calls to the New York Times. Final phone call, I said, tired of me calling, come on up. And I went and I sat in this room with the foreign editor and the deputy foreign editor, and we talked. And then the second day, we talked some more, and he said, I meet a lot of charlatans in this business. How do I know that we can trust you? And they knew about my athletic background because my name had been in the paper there. And I said, all I know about, and I quoted Camus, who said, who played soccer as a boy in Algiers. And I said, all I know about, quoting him, all I know about ethics I know from sports. You can't cheat. And that's what made them decide we're going to go with this fellow. And so what the foreign editor, the deputy foreign editor, did was that night, he took me into a room at the New York Times and he gave me an envelope. And in that envelope was $500, a check for $500, and a small letter that said that I would be doing research with a New York Times letterhead. I'm going to do research in South Asia. And he said, you can take this $500, have the best night of your life in New York. You can apply to a plane ticket to Afghanistan, and you can go to Pakistan, and you can look across the border and decide not to go. You can do whatever you want. The money is yours. And that's all I needed. They trusted me. I took my old Army coat, which was not a smart thing to do. I learned later, my fatigue jacket. I got a pair of, and a few other bits of clothes that I thought would be necessary, none of which were, and didn't use anything that was American. And I flew to Karachi, flew to Paris, and then from there to Karachi, and then up to Islamabad, where I met the New York Times correspondent, who took me to dinner, or it was lunch actually, at a British hill station in the north of Islamabad. After which we came outside, and he looked west towards Afghanistan. All we could see was mountains and trees, and he said, "There lies deepest, darkest Afghanistan. Don't worry about the story. It will come to you." And I felt myself sigh a bit. I didn't realize that I was scared, that I was nervous. Then I made my way up to Peshawar, which is the old, to a hotel or motel called, but it was one story only, called Dean's, an old British hotel, which I had been told was the place I needed to stay. And I found a driver named Munshi, and he took me to what was then the 7 major political religious parties that Pakistan allowed, in Pakistan's control of Afghanistan, Pakistan allowed to exist. And what I'm getting at here, and I don't want to make this too political, is that Pakistan, very close ally of the United States since 1954 in the Cold War, had its own agenda, which it still has today, to try and, because it cannot move east or cannot move west east against India, wants to recreate the Mughal Empire and therefore control what was then Soviet Central Asia, using the Mujahideen, which means holy warriors, our allies. At the same time, the United States, in order to pay back, and this has all been documented, pay back the Soviet Union for providing arms to the North Vietnamese, we wanted to draw them into Afghanistan to create for them their own Vietnam. And I knew none of this when I first went there. All I knew was that I wanted to go on this, what we'll today call an adventure. I didn't consider that adventure. I didn't use that word. It was just that I had to do this. And so I went from one group to another with Munshi. And one said, come with us. We'll take you up. And it was north. I said, well, how long does it take to get to your base? He said, a month. And I said, no, that's too long. And I finally went to, it was about the 6th Mujahideen party I met with. I went into this, it's all adobe or houses and adobe walls, and went inside. This man, bearded man, bandolier, pistol, sitting on the floor, drinking a glass of green tea. And I said to myself, this is the man. My instinct said, this is the man I want to go with. And what he was, his name was Yunus Khalas, who became very close to Osama bin Laden many years later. And bin Laden, after 9/11, before he went up to what's called Tora Bora in the mountains, he stayed with Yunus Khalas. I didn't know the world that I was about to enter. And a man with him said to me in English, what would you like to do? And I said, I want to live with the Mujahideen. I just knew instinctively that this was the right place. And later I realized that he reminded me of some of the, in a way, of the world in which I grew up in. Very religious, but there was also a rifle present. It was not unlike, people that I grew up around. My father didn't have a beard or anything like that. And this made me, to put it mildly, very comfortable. I felt almost everything's going to be fine. They took me, the next day a man came and knocked on the door. He took me to the bazaar, had me fitted out in Afghan clothes, a turban, sandals. Went back to the hotel the next day. A man came, knocked on the door, put me in a car, 4 men in the car. We drove through traffic, stops in the middle of traffic in Peshawar. Those 2 men get out. 2 men from nowhere I saw got in the car. It was the beginning of my life with a very dark, intriguing, no way that an outsider can understand world of then the Mujahideen, today the Taliban. From there we crossed into what are called the tribal areas of Afghanistan, the size of Connecticut, the headquarters many years later of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, then the headquarters of the Mujahideen. We made our way to a place called Miram Shah. That afternoon we stopped, and they said, "You're on your own." In effect, took me into a compound, an adobe compound, and then they put me on the floor in a small shed, and in this shed were stacks of pine boxes with black letterings telling the type of ammunition and the type of weapon that was inside. This is when the U.S., the CIA, had already begun to supply them with arms, our allies, our proxy army in Afghanistan. 3 days later, and I lived on gritty rice and tea in that very fly and mosquito infested place, shed. 2 or 3 days later, a boy came, took me, drove a Toyota pickup about half a mile up into the mountain, got out. I ate gritty rice with the family, and then we began to hike up into the mountains, and the man told me to take off my shoes. Now the testing begins. Take off my shoes. I was making too much noise, and by the time we reached a tent with a group of Mujahideen in it, my feet were bloody, and I slept for a few hours, and then by dawn the next morning, we made our way up by a series of guides into Afghanistan. And I remember climbing high and saying, "This is just like National Geographic," is how naive I was. The next day, I came down into a valley. We passed a Soviet base with Mi-24 helicopter gunships. I didn't know what they were at the time, beyond the fact that they were giant helicopters, and stayed with a man named Jalaluddin Haqqani and his 17 other men. I lived with them for a month. We lived on gritty rice and tea. They made sure that I ate before they did. They treated me like a king. And at that time, there was no such thing as a telephone, no such thing as electricity, no roads, no cars, no way in the outside world. If anything happened to you, they put you on a camel. It took 3 days to Pakistan. From there, after living with them, I made my way south, living with the Mujahideen in Kandahar. Serious firefight, more than one in particular. Made my way by camel with a rifle out from Afghanistan to Pakistan. Came back to the New York Times, and my first article that I ever wrote was on the front page. And I was totally consumed by the world of Afghanistan. And I continued in that vein for the next 5 years. Then, as I went on through my life, but then I'm living in New York City. Then I was no longer working for anybody else. I was trying to become a writer. I was working for a private investigation firm on Wall Street on 9/11. I got up in the morning and I was working on a book based on actually a National Geographic story that I had, a project assignment that I had, and I noticed as we approached Fulton Street subway stop that the trains went very, very slowly, and then I got to the Wall Street station. We walked up onto the street and it was quiet, it was empty. I said, there's either an accident or someone's going to jump. And I walked to the corner and I saw the flames rippling across the World Trade Center. I went up to a cop and I said, this policeman, I said, what happened? And he told me, we got everything under control. And I walked over to the World Trade Center and I looked straight up and there was a woman with black hair, dark black hair coming down, and I said and she was looking out a window. I said, those windows don't open. They don't have anything under control. And then just in front of me, the building came crumbling down like a deck of cards. Everybody screamed. I ran like everybody else. Eventually that night, that afternoon, we came home, and that evening I went out to go across the street to a store, and a woman who in my building works for CBS said, Afghanistan. Not hello, not how are you, just Afghanistan. And for the first time I thought, oh, Afghanistan, my small country. It all began there. I didn't think of anything except the tragedy. By then, of course, I knew about bin Laden. I knew about the rise of the Taliban. So the next day, CBS hired me. 3 days later, and WABC television hired me, and but 3 months later, they needed somebody for Afghanistan. I went, and unlike every other journalist there, I was not that interested. I was interested in the war, but I was more interested in finding the men I knew from the 1980s, the Mujahideen, and I felt that I hadn't. My relationship with them was so deep, and I trusted them so much, and they were so good to me that it was something deep inside of me that I couldn't leave it. And what became, and then so then, I had my own work to do, and then I had things I had to write. And then, as I was finishing one, I got a call or an email, the type that any writer wants, from the editor of New York Times Books. And he asked me to come back to New York, which I did. We had breakfast in a diner. And he said, it's clear the CIA does not know where Osama bin Laden is hiding. We all know that the tribal areas of Pakistan, the size of Connecticut, headquarters of the Mujahideen during the 1980s, is where Al-Qaeda has its headquarters, where the Taliban have their headquarters. No one knows that place. It's like a blank space on the map. Can you go there? That's what I wanted. I could hardly wait. And so I wanted to find the Akhanis. If I could find the Akhanis with whom I had lived in the 1980s, I knew I could find bin Laden. And the reason I knew I could find bin Laden is, and I would never have said anything like this to anybody back in that time, and even now it sounds a bit pretentious. But one time after I was there for about 2 weeks, a Egyptian army major came and lived with us. He hated me because I was American, but I noticed how much power he seemed to have over Jalaluddin Haqqani, the leader of our small band of Mujahideen there. And he allowed him even to use, at his demand, at the Egyptians' demand, a SAM-7 anti-aircraft missile. We only had 3 precious missiles then. And when he tried to shoot down a Soviet helicopter, missed. And also now, the Russians know where we are. But there was something about the tie between the Arabs and Jalaluddin that I knew then instinctively, but had no way of knowing there was anything more than that, that this is somehow, this war and Jalaluddin and the Mujahideen are part of something larger than Afghanistan. I didn't know that that man was the beginning of Al-Qaeda. And only many, many years did I realize that. And this is one reason why I knew or sensed and felt, and I still do, and actually events have borne me out, that this is truly, I was not wrong, that if I could get to Jalaluddin, to the Afghanis, I could find out about bin Laden, feeling because of the tie that I had with them. And so ultimately I went also, during this time I had a desire to, and I still do, and I'm working on this right now, is to, oh boy, I don't know how much, I hope you're gonna edit this. I was watching, it was 2006, I was sitting in the CBS newsroom, and I was reading the New York Times, and there was an interview with Pat Tillman's father, the NFL football star who had joined the U.S. Army and became an icon for so many people in America. And I said, there's something about this death that doesn't add up. I've been in the Army, I have an athletic background, I'm from the West, I grew up in a relatively small town, not like San Jose, but it was from the West, and I'd seen him on television. I felt a certain kinship to him because he had said he didn't feel that he had lived up to, or he wasn't equal to his ancestors who had fought in wars. Neither did I, who did not have to fight in Vietnam, feel that I was equal to my ancestors, and particularly my father, who had done so much in the Marine Corps in the Pacific in World War II. And so I went to everybody at CBS, and they said, it's a great idea, Jere, but no, it's too expensive, we don't have the money, and it's too dangerous. But on my own, I used my own money, I went back to Afghanistan, and I, through my contacts, went to the canyon twice where Tillman was killed, and I had held on to that to find out from that side what really happened to him and why. And it was that trip, my first time, wearing Afghan clothes, growing a beard, going back up into the mountains of Afghanistan, that I said, I want to do this again. I want to live up here. I want to, in some ways, I suppose, return to the adrenaline I felt, the closeness I felt, my belief in, and my respect for these men who had nothing but treated me so well. And to me, there was really no distinction between the Mujahideen and the Taliban. I found out later about where I was wrong, but at that time I didn't. So I returned to the mountains, dressed as an Afghan, living for 7 months off and on, up in the mountains, meeting with the Taliban, taking risks, going ever deeper into that world. And I remember clearly one time, not far from Tora Bora, going up there with a drone overhead. And I said, how am I going to survive this? But the Taliban knew that the drone was over there. We could hear it. At that time, that one had an engine that sounded like a lawnmower. But to this day, I think the reason they didn't do anything was because they saw my pen and they saw the notebook that I had. I was dressed like an Afghan. My beard was long. I was living in the world that I had come to enjoy and feel so much a part of, where I felt so alive in the 1980s. Finally, my guides said that we finally have arranged it. We can find, and I've skipped over 100 things on how we arranged all this, but we decided they were going to take me deeper into the tribal areas where I would find the Afghanis. And we arranged this trip. Taliban, I remember the day before, the evening before, I got a call from my fixer saying, the Taliban guide is crossing the border from Pakistan. We're on. He didn't say we're on, but in effect, we are going. I remember clearly, I had gone to a mosque and attended a prayer service to see, most importantly, was, can I blend in? Well, I'm not Muslim? No, not at all. And I was, in some ways, it's, I suppose, sacrilegious, but I didn't feel that, and I don't truly believe that. I had to find a way to blend in entirely. And could I pass praying? Did I know how to do this? Then I took one final walk through the bazaar. Can I pass? Can I buy? I knew how to. My language was not good, but I know enough, or knew enough at the time, how to buy 2 oranges and pay for that and walk on and use that in X number of sentences. Once I start with a paragraph, I can't do anything. And then I felt it was time to go, and something deep in this, the first time I'd ever felt in my life this pit in my stomach telling me what you're about to do is very dangerous. I made my way back to the guest house, an Afghan guest house where we were staying. The Taliban, by the way, is the plural. Talib means seeker. It means student in Persian, in Pashto. A Talib is a religious student. He is also a seeker, seeking God, seeking spiritual enlightenment. And Taliban, of course, is therefore the plural. And so this Talib had come across. He was waiting, and he was in our room. And that night, I got a phone call from an Afghan member of parliament who I had used as an intermediary to arrange part of this trip. And he told me that there was a Pakistani army officer who had been kidnapped by the Taliban. There were too many soldiers in that area. It was too dangerous for me to go. What he was saying was that what has happened is it's become far more dangerous than what I thought it would be when I arranged for you to go on this trip in the first place. That was in essence what he was saying, but he couldn't say it on the phone because the phone would be tapped. And so then, for the first time, I remember saying, trust your instincts. Always trust your instincts, Jere. And for the first time, I ignored them. I said, I have to do this. I have to go. And the next morning, we had breakfast in this guest house, and my fixers, the man who I had arranged to be my intermediary, and we had the Taliban guide, and my fixer's father came, and I gave him everything I had, my passport, because I could not in any way wear Western clothes. I now had to be deep into Afghanistan. I had to pass like I felt I was able to pass in the 1980s. We got close to the border. We drove from the hotel close to the border, went on a dirt road. Dirt road ended, and my fixer said to me, give gas money to our driver. I went close to the driver to give him the money, and I saw his eyes were watery. And he came close to me, and he did something no Afghan, actually no man has ever done to me. He kissed me on the cheek, and he said, go with God. He said something else that I did not understand, but I knew later what he was saying is that I know you're going to be kidnapped. I know you may not return. You probably won't, but I can't tell you, and I've enjoyed it, and I like you, but go with God. His watery eyes. Some would say he was, and I thought this for a time, it was a Judas kiss, that he was betraying me. I don't believe that today. I believed it for a long time. I don't believe it anymore. And we left, and we began to hike up into the mountains. That evening, we were going single file, 20 yards apart. My lead bodyguard with a rifle, Kalashnikov in the lead, 20 yards behind him, another man with a Kalashnikov. Then me, and then behind me, my fixer, who was overweight and always 20, 30, 40 yards behind. And I looked up as we're going into this valley, and I saw a tinge of black move behind a rock, and I knew instinctively, that's not a goat, that's not a black sheep. And then by the time, and I could feel the pit in my stomach, I felt fear all over me. And then that black tinge, all of a sudden the man rose with a black turban. Muhammad wore a black turban, Taliban wore black turbans. Raised his rifle high, 10, 12 men came, spread out, running down this path, running down the ridge. Can I, get down. And I said, I'm dead. And I had cotton mouth. And a man in the center with a walkie-talkie, the only one who had that equipment, technology, if you will, came up to me, stared at me. Where were you? Where did you come from, and where are you going? And I tried to answer this in Pashto. There's no, if he finds out I'm American, I'm done. And I mispronounced Peshawar. It's called Peshawar in that dialect in the mountain there. And he said, you're not Afghan. And they took me up into they grabbed me. And what bothered me also is that when the rifles came down, that my bodyguards never fired their weapons. And I knew something was wrong, something was strange, something was going on that I didn't comprehend. All I knew is that I was now being led up in the mountain, came on top of the ridge. They put me down, faced me west, blindfolded me, my hands behind me, tied my hands. And I thought of, and when you're blindfolded, you lose all sense of power, all sense of independence, or the ability to do anything. You are totally at the mercy of those who have blindfolded you. And I remember looking west, and I thought the weather was warm and gentle. There was a breeze, and I said, it's like California. I remember that. And I looked west, and I thought of my father. My mother had died, and my brother, my sister. And they put the rifle, a Kalashnikov, against my temple. I could hear and they took it away and then cocked it, and I was like a sheep waiting to be slaughtered in a slaughterhouse. It was shock, just pure shock. And I just waited, my back straight. I have to look straight ahead. I can't bend down. I have to look good for my family, or look at least with an essence of self-pride about it. And of course they didn't do anything. They grabbed me, took me down the mountain, put me into a car. We drove, I don't know where or how, for how long, maybe 2 hours. Gravel road, dirt road, gravel road, dirt road. Maybe we drove in circles. I don't know. They pulled me out on the ground, went all over me, tried to find, and took some money, what little money I had, asked if I was Muslim. And I had to, for the first time, well, I try to think that I don't lie, but I responded in Arabic, the little Arabic that I know. And whether that made any difference or not, I don't know. Back in the car, and now I'm alone in the back of this car. Before, one of my bodyguards and one of my fixers was there inside. Even though I was blindfolded, I knew they were there because one tried to hold my hand or wrote something on my hand. And then we began to climb up a dirt and gravel road. I remember the car couldn't make it. It finally got going. And I know they're going to take me up to a mountaintop and they're going to kill me. They're going to behead me. And what happens is when you become kidnapped and you're blindfolded and you're in Afghanistan, well, no longer, I'm somewhere in Pakistan, is that everything all of a sudden has changed. It's primal. Everything is primal. It's about how am I going to I know I'm going to die. I know they're going to kill me. I know they're going to behead me. And you just accept it. There's nothing I can do. I just have to do this with a certain amount of dignity. How can I withstand? And this is what I've learned more, as much as anything, if not more, is how long will the pain be? How long will it last before I'm dead? That's what you worry about. And we kept climbing and climbing, and then we came to a place, And I heard the dogs bark, and they took me out of the car, put my hand against the wall, and could feel the adobe, the dirt, and baked mud wall, and dogs barking, and into a room. And they took off my blindfold, and I was happy for about 30 seconds because I saw my two bodyguards and my fixer there. I wasn't alone. And I looked at the wall, and I looked for blood on the wall, and there was each a cot, a rope cot, that's 4 of them in the room, a stake in the ground with chains in it. And I said, I am deep, somewhere deep in the mountains of Pakistan, in a Taliban prison, and no one can find me. And the man came up to me and he asked, who is your father? And what is your father's name? That is deep, deep Afghanistan. That means that the only thing that what matters most, the most important question in Afghanistan is who is your grandfather? It is a tribal culture. It is a world where you are judged by your family, and the family being part of the tribe. A central government, a sense of democracy as we know it here in the West, that's all totally irrelevant. This is very ancient, tribal, mountain Afghanistan. But I was deep into Pakistan now, somewhere deep into Pakistan. The Pashtuns, the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. There are more Pashtuns in Pakistan across the border than in Afghanistan. The border was drawn by the British when they ruled there and made it 2 countries in 1947 when the British finally left. And I realized that I could not keep this charade going anymore, and I had said my real name is this, and I waited for them to kill me. Where it became hard, truly hard, the first time was about 3 days later. It was midnight. It was late at night. It was late. I have no idea what the exact time was. We were allowed out about 5 minutes, if that, 3 to 5 minutes at night from a makeshift toilet. And each man went outside. They took my bodyguards out, and they took the fixer out, and then they came back. And then they came to me. They faced me toward and then by now there are about 20 men in this room. And the Taliban leader took my camera. They'd taken everything I had. I had a small film camera with me. They took everything when they got me. And he said, how do I turn this on? He thrust it at me. And I knew what was coming, and I said, oh, you're about to film me, and you want me to help you film my own execution. Because now they had a group of men behind me with their rifles. And the hardest thing to do, when you think of those hostages, the American hostages that were murdered by ISIS, it's so much courage. It took me forever, it seemed, for me to lift my back up. I had my back, I had facing the floor, bent over, because I didn't want to, I don't want to even say it, I didn't want to sit up straight with my back straight. My mother, when I was a boy, always told me to sit up straight. I couldn't do that, because by sitting up straight now my neck is exposed. And over there, one time they had a small little chair a guy sat on, maybe 6 inches, 8 inches off the ground, chewing on a piece of wheat, and with a Kalashnikov in his lap. And I said to myself, asked myself, how do you want to die? You want to die by a Kalashnikov spraying bullets across your chest, or do you want to be beheaded? Whatever comes first. That's what I want. It's the alleviation of pain. Years later, I met in New York with a fellow named Terry White, who was sent by the Archbishop of Canterbury to Lebanon, to Beirut, to try and negotiate the release of hostages there. He was in prison. They kept him in captivity for 4 years. Some of that was in solitary confinement. We met and had coffee in New York. And what he wanted to talk about more than anything else was the mock executions. That was what that bothered him, that hurt him, that stuck with him all those years, that's what he wanted to talk about. And it took me a very long time before, because they did it twice. The Taliban went through this charade, and then they stopped, they went back outside, they came in a second time, and this time I was wearing this small Afghan hat. It's like, looks like a pancake hat. You see it on television. They took it off, exposed my head. They took the Kalashnikov, which is cut at an angle. It's not like a rifle in America or a pistol. It's cut at an angle, and they pushed it, not too hard, but they pushed it enough into my temple. The man behind took out the knife, that long. Like that, they use it to slaughter buffalo, water buffalo or sheep. And I lifted my arm up, and then he stopped. They didn't do anything else. Came down, but I realized at that moment that night was the worst night of my life. Also the best night, one of the best nights, maybe the best night of my life. And what I'm saying is that I had the courage to look my killer in the eye, because the man looked at me and he kept staring at me, and I knew I was willing to fight. My father would not be ashamed. My family would not be ashamed. Finally, this time I kept my back straight, and I said, "It's just you and me." I looked at the Taliban commander. "Go ahead. Let's go." What I was saying was, if you're going to kill me, I'm going to fight. What I got from that was I had the courage to face my killer. I wasn't a coward. I'd gone to Afghanistan, I think, because I hadn't been in the military. I hadn't fought in a war. I had to measure up to my father, to be a man. The Taliban gave me that. They frightened me to death. But I had the courage, ultimately, I found, to face my killer. My back was straight. I was able to say goodbye to my mother. My mother was already gone. To my father, to my brother, and my sister. I remember they put their rifles away. They left. I stumbled over to my cot, put my head down on this. I cried for about 2 seconds. And I couldn't cry in front of them. I couldn't be a coward. And then, I don't know when, 2 weeks maybe later, they came in one night and they said, or late one day, it was late, toward dusk, and they said, well, there were two things happened. One, a man said to me, "We can do anything we want to you here, and no one can find you." And then they said, we're going to ask for $1.5 million and 3 men from Guantanamo. And then a man said to me, and he called me a monkey behind my back. I didn't understand that word, of course. And I said to myself, I'm in a I may have survived that, but I'm in a very, very dangerous situation here.
Were your parents, was your family aware?
No one knew. No one knew. Well, at that time, what I had no idea of was that they had begun, when they said that we're asking 1.5 million and 3 men from Guantanamo, what they had begun to do was negotiate. And that friends of mine, men I knew who worked for CBS, Afghans, knew everybody, a lot of people, and by now, the journalist community in Kabul, within days, Jere's disappeared, he's gone, and things had started to move. I knew nothing of this. All that was going on the outside, didn't have a clue. I knew everything that was going on, I think. I knew everything that was happening in that cell, but I had no idea what was happening on the outside. So they had begun to negotiate. And what I thought I had to do was find $1.5 million to pay the ransom, to get out of there, to survive. And so what I had done under pressure was give the phone number of my family to them, because I knew I was going to have to take money from my brother and my sister, from my father, take money away from my brother and sister's children's college education to pay for my release. So all of this, not all of a sudden, but now I'm causing trouble to my own family, which made me feel anything but strong. And they wanted to even bring in my fixer's father, this was all a charade, this part, as the collateral. You know, in a bank, you put up something else. Well, in this case, you put up a human being. And so while this negotiation was going on, they were trying to use me to get money what I could. But the problem is that they used that phone number and they called my family, frightening them there. That my brother's wife gets a phone call, or my sister gets a phone call from the Taliban. At the same time, the State Department and the FBI had begun to contact my family. And they have a system they put in play. The FBI, not the CIA, is in charge of American kidnappings around the world. This goes back to in the 1930s, or I forget exactly when it was, when it was a kidnapping, they transferred a kidnapping case from, the boy was kidnapped, the Limburg child was kidnapped in New York, or in New Jersey, and whoever kidnapped him took him across the state lines into New York, thereby giving J. Edgar Hoover an opportunity to use the FBI, expand the FBI's control from it became a federal case, and they expanded that to include now the whole world. It's not the CIA, although they played a role in my case, and they play a role, I'm sure, in others, but it's the FBI in charge. And so those two entities were in contact with my family. And CBS was operating and the foreign editor was doing everything she could. So all of this was going on, but I knew nothing. But what became difficult, where everything changed again, was that one day my main jailer came in, and he said that one of their commander's sons, I think it was a son, not a daughter, needed a new kidney, and they wanted to take mine. Or maybe they would take the main vein, and I don't know what it's called, the vein that goes from your groin down to your foot. And I said, no. I'm not going to allow a man to come in here with a syringe, tie me down, knock me out, do something, and take my kidney and sell it. No, that's not going to happen. Because every time the door opened, when they brought food in for us, I would look outside. Which way is west? Which way are the men praying? Which way is Mecca? Which way would I go if I have to run towards Pakistan or run towards Afghanistan? How do I get out of here? That's what you're trying to do. Your whole life is spent trying to maintain this tie to your jailer and the men around you, at the same time stay alive and figure out, how do I escape? I got to get out of here. That's what it's a constant. And so I said, I'm leaving. If this is not going to happen. And I paced the room like a tiger in a cage that you see in a zoo. Back and forth, gotta go. That night, a man, one of my bodyguards, who was on the other side of the room, stayed about 10 minutes outside, maybe even 15 minutes outside when it was time to go to the bathroom toilet, which was simply a place on the ground that they had for us. And then the next time, then the jailer came in, and he came up to me about 6 inches from my face. If you try to do anything like escape, I will come at you like a dog. At that moment, I knew that I had been betrayed, that I could not trust anybody in that room, and it went from being a primal experience to reptilian. And for the first time, I wanted to kill somebody. I wanted to harm somebody badly. I lay in that cot at night, and I'd look across at my bodyguard, and all I saw was blood all over him. I have never had that feeling in my life. So you become a very completely different person, totally cut off from what we'll call society, if you will. It's all beyond primal, it's reptilian. And at the same time you find yourself, and this is a very delicate thing, especially in Western culture, and people have said this to me a lot, it's called Stockholm Syndrome, that our jailer would go away sometimes. He'd go away for 2 days, 3 days. Once he came in and grabbed ammunition that we in the corner there, had a box of ammunition, and he walked out with that. When he came back, I felt better because he was good to me. He brought food to me. I had become somehow I trusted him in a way. There's no way I should trust him, but I did trust him. It's what happens to the human psychic. It happens to people who are totally dependent upon somebody for food and for security. And the only way I could live, and what's so important, is to acknowledge that, deal with that without betraying yourself, without giving anything away, without showing weakness, without betraying anybody else. And it's a double-edged sword, but it's something that I was able to negotiate. Ultimately, one day, it was that night, the night before, the jailer was very relaxed, and he left the door open even for a while. And he was there, but the door was open. And the next day, he came in, and with a woman's chaudhry, the women wear. You see photos of Afghan women in the streets. He brought that in and threw it on a cot, put it on. So I put it on, and I knew we were going. And they took me downstairs. I didn't know, outside and downstairs. I didn't know I was on the top of a house. There were people living in the room below us. And out to a car, and I could feel a lot of people around me.
So they disguised you as a woman?
I was a woman. I was disguised as a woman.
Which in Afghanistan are fully covered?
Fully covered. I was completely covered.
So they have a chance of getting you out of there without...
Very good point, because no one has realized what you just said. No one has really honed in on that. And all the times I've had to tell the story in various ways, it's exactly right. And they had to find a way to get me out of that crowd, out of that village, wherever we were. I have no idea where we were. Only that, and this is important later on, only that I knew that there was a drone overhead, so somehow the United States knew where we were, in what area we were. Somehow they had figured this out. It was only about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks now, that I learned how they did that, how that transpired in a bit. And so as we began to drive, I heard, and this, two things here. One day, this is political, but this is important. One small thing is that, not small, but important, is that one day my jailer said the political agent, he mentioned the words political agent. I'll come back to that in a minute. A political agent, well, a bit. A political agent is something created by the British that controls each tribal area. I was in the tribal areas. When you think of a tribal area, think of like the Navajo reservation or any other Indian reservation or in America, only far larger. This was the way that the British tried to control that region at the time when they were there. Today, the political agent reports directly to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. I remember when we were going, the car started to move. I'm dressed as a woman. There are people all around. I can hear people all around us. I'm blindfolded, of course. I'm blindfolded and I have the chandri over me. It's hot. And I hear a horn, very small, a horn beep like there's somebody else behind us. There's another car here somewhere, or maybe that was our car. And I tried to roll the window down and stick my head out, and he thought I was trying to escape, and he cocked his rifle. And I didn't realize then how close I was. He made it very clear that he had chambered a bullet whether he was trying to show off or not. Taliban guys don't show off; they don't have to. That he had said he'd chambered a bullet. That they were under as much pressure as, not as much as I was, but what they were doing was maybe backed by somebody else, and I do believe that it got out of control. And that they were in control. They were in control of me, but what they were doing was, if anybody found out, then they would be in trouble. Otherwise, why worry so much about my being discovered by some villager? So we finally made the same. I don't know where we went. I have no idea. But then we got to this field, and they took off my chandri, and I looked at the sun, and for the first time since I was kidnapped, I saw the sun.
How many weeks has it been?
6.5 weeks. And then we began to hike up into a hill, and and they stopped, and I saw a man looking at a going through something on the ground, and I said, "Oh, that's a suicide bomber's gear. They're going to put that on me. They're going to send me out as a suicide bomber." They said that one thing I had to do, and I didn't discuss this, I had to listen for hours and hours and hours to Taliban suicide tapes. And they talked about training me to be a suicide bomber to go against the Pentagon. And they wanted to, in addition, of course, to survive, if I wanted to get out of there, I had to convert to Islam. So I was playing a very delicate game of praying but not praying, and going through the motions, but I certainly couldn't mock them. And there was, on one hand, and this goes back to my childhood, there was a certain comfort in that, as there was comfort I was with the Khanis before. Very violent men. It's a world of rifles and death and war. At the same time, it's a world of religion. And the hardship involved was something that was instilled into me as a boy, to be tough, to be out to be able to, one match to light a fire, and to learn how to ride a horse as a boy. Was something that my father instilled with me that in a certain way manifested itself or became, without my knowing it, made me comfortable with the Mujahideen and eventually with the Taliban. The difference between the Mujahideen and the Taliban is, once a Soviet helicopter came over us when I was with the Mujahideen, and we were in the part of our compound that was filled with ammunition. There were all these pine boxes with them, in English, of the weapons and the type of ammunition by then that the CIA was supplying to the Afghanis. And the helicopter was right on top of us, just hovering above us. All he had to do was drop one bomb and the whole valley would have blown up. And the man in front of me against the wall was shivering in fear. The Taliban, even with a drone overhead, walked in and out of my cell with no fear. The sense of martyrdom, the sense of dying was so much greater and easier for the Taliban and the Mujahideen. I attribute that to the change in Afghanistan. When I first went to Afghanistan in 1973, there was a discotheque in the street in Kabul. There were 11 movie theaters. There were outdoor cafes. Afghanistan was not a radical environment at all. There were 6,000 hippies in Kabul in the 1970s when I was there. If you look at academic research, hippies introduced Afghans to the drug trafficking world, international drug trafficking markets. There were the world of, I remember once hearing the music in the call to prayer, the Rolling Stones. I could hear the Rolling Stones mixed with in a Jefferson Airplane mixed with the evening call to prayer. The Taliban are the result of the Arabization of Afghanistan. I don't want to get political here, but that means is that the U.S. and its ally Saudi Arabia with Pakistan, in order to fight the Soviet Union, brought in so many, and the 9/11 Commission only dealt with this somewhat, brought in thousands of of Arabs, out of which came Al-Qaeda, and from which we get ISIS today. And so it's made Afghanistan a much more conservative, violent world than it was when I went there as a boy, which made it so romantic, which is why there were so many hippies there, why it was so appealing. You see these long camel caravans come through the streets, silent in the afternoon sun. It was with these women in bare feet and unveiled. By the way, the Taliban never got any nomad woman ever to take off her veil. Don't think for a minute that Afghan women are simply used by men and have no power whatsoever. Very, very strong people, especially the nomads, who still exist, which is part of the romance of Afghanistan. So when I saw that suicide bomb, I thought there was a suicide bomber there who was preparing to either blow himself up or attach it to me. And I envisioned myself having that strapped to me, and they were forcing me, when we were going to come to the place where I envisioned my sister carrying a briefcase with $1.5 million in it, because I had no idea what happened on the other, no idea, that we're going to come to exchange. And then on one area, a boy would be going through where my sister was with other Americans and such, waiting for me. A little boy would blow himself up, and at the same time I envisioned Apache helicopters coming in. Of course, none of that transpired. The man was, to this day I don't know what he was doing, but I thought it was a suicide bomber. We began to hike, and we hiked for hours and hours and hours, and I remember being about 30 yards behind the Taliban leader, and I said, all I have to do is run up to him. I didn't have much energy, but I was so, this is how you think, grab his rifle, I can shoot him. Of course, that never happened. We finally, after that night, they finally stopped. They said, I leaned over, I could hardly walk. We know where your family is. We know how to reach your family. We have your phone number. We're going to be watching you. Now go. And we kept walking, and by then it was late at night, and I fell down a few times in the dirt. And we kept walking, and then after a while, I don't know if it was cigarette lighters or what kind of lights they had, but all of a sudden, one of my guides had a light went on, and we could see these lights coming toward us, and men came up and they hugged me just gently. And to this day, I'm almost positive they were not completely Taliban. They had too much weaponry on them. They were not just one rifle. They were, because I could just feel all this pistol and whatever else they were carrying. Meaning, this was not simply a Taliban operation. These things do not happen in a vacuum. That's all I can say about that. But finally, we came to a river. We crossed a river on a boat. A pickup truck picked me up from there. We drove on for 20 minutes or so. We came to another area near another river, and we waited. And then a man went down to the river, flicked a light. On the other side, another light came on, and what was a Toyota pickup. I didn't know it at the time what it was. Came down, blinked his lights, stopped at the water's edge, and a ferry, hand rope ferry, no electricity, no gasoline, nothing remotely modern. Just came across a barge, came across on a rope pulley, and they put me on the ferry with some of the Taliban, my bodyguards. We crossed the river, and my bodyguards took their hand. One of them took their hands on my beard, which is a sign of he's pleading with me, don't betray me, don't turn me in. We're saving you. We haven't harmed you. Don't tell the Americans where we are. That's what he was saying by pulling on my beard. And we got to the other side. They could not cross. They could not. That was Afghanistan. My fixer and I got off, got into the pickup. We went for maybe a half hour, stopped again. I saw a man holding a lantern like that, like they do in a railroad here in the U.S. And I thought, oh no, the Taliban again. And how am I going to? I can't look like an American. How do I handle this? And then we waited there, and an SUV came out, and it was the tribal leader from that area. And everything is tribal. And the tribal chief was the one who was in charge. It was the tribal chief who my friends, all the people who were looking for me, had worked with. And it was he who drove me. And so he came out, and behind him was another SUV with rifles out the window on both sides, probably half a dozen men at least, in there, all armed, my bodyguards now. And they drove me for maybe an hour. And we came to Jalalabad in Afghanistan, came about 50 yards from the U.S. base. The tribal chief got out of the car and walked away. And they drove me into the base, and the driver inexplicably Afghan knew exactly where to go. Took me around and into this place where they had a cyclone fence set up with a house, or a sheet metal type of corrugated metal house or building. Took me in there, closed the thing off, and 2, 3 Americans guys grabbed me, took me out, and carried me, or picked me up and brought me into a room. And there I was. There were a guy with long hair and pistol on his side, and said, where do you want to go? You want to go to Kabul, or you want to go to Bagram, which is the air base? I had no idea. One meant the Army, one meant the FBI. They checked me for my health and gave me some food. I wasn't the least bit hungry. And then I had no idea, so I just said Kabul, because that would be closer. And the next day, and then the FBI, they took me to the FBI, and they took over from there. They had a plane waiting. A special forces guy was with us, very good man. Even he and his wife sent me a note a few months later, and I took me to this, and then drove me to the embassy, where found a place for me to sleep, but I was not the least bit tired. And then the ambassador and other officials were there, and then they had me talk to the CIA, and then put me on a plane, and the FBI brought me back to America, to New York. And in JFK, walking down through the hallway, empty. Never seen empty customs before. Just the police, the FBI, and me. Into the customs where they stamp your passport, and everybody turned and looked at this man with long hair and long beard, skinny as a rail, holding his pants up. Who in the world is that? And it was me. And the guy stopped, smiled, and he said, here, and then we have to stamp your passport. Took me off, and then we walked off through customs into a room, big table, all these FBI guys there, and put his hand on my shoulder and, welcome home, Jere, welcome home. You're safe, you're safe. I said, can they get me here? And he said, no. The man across the table said, but check your phone when you go home. The Taliban have called you. We want to know we'd like you to know what they said. I said, they followed me back here. No cameras, no television cameras at all. The foreign editor at CBS came and she brought me back to my apartment. And I'm not married. And there was that night, I saw the Taliban on the wall, and I woke up, saw the Taliban the next day when I went for a run in Central Park. And along the way, I got a call from some people who were responsible, and one was an MI6 agent, British intelligence. And an Afghan said to me, or a CBS bureau chief in London said, Jere, the FBI didn't do anything. And he gave me this man's name, saved your life. I would have gone to Perth or to Johannesburg, the farthest place on the planet, to find this man. He came to Washington. He took me, we had dinner, and we went to a house where he was staying, and we talked, and he said, we did everything possible to prevent a second Daniel Pearl. I was the next person kidnapped in Pakistan, next journalist kidnapped in Pakistan after Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl was slaughtered. When I was facing the camera and the Taliban and the Taliban put the rifles to my temple, I thought of Daniel Pearl. And so what happened was that eventually, and then he said, you have no idea what the ripple effects will be. And he's been working, this MI6, British MI6 agent, like CIA, couldn't have, he was absolutely right. You can divide a kidnapping up into two parts. Everything that happens inside and everything that happens afterwards. And they're almost equal. And a kidnapping never goes away. And so one day, I was giving a talk in New York for a group of journalists. And the man who introduced me used that phrase. He said, how can I introduce you? I can say the thing about Daniel Pearl. And then a fellow came up to me with his girlfriend, now his wife, and he had a British accent, and he said, do you think you would have survived if you were Jewish? And I was taken aback by that. And then I realized later that my fixer asked if I ate pork. And my jailer later asked me the same thing. Daniel Pearl was massacred by Al-Qaeda, and I was released. And why was I released? I still haven't figured everything out. I've written a book on why. I went back in 2017 to figure out who really kidnapped me and why. Because when they ask about the political agent, and not one American has ever asked me about the political agent, but I made a trip to London, and I talked with the British police and about Scotland Yard people about kidnappings and that. They said, we're not going to tell you anything, but they asked me, what did the political agent say? The only people who have ever asked me about the political agent, not one person in America even seemed to know about the political agent who goes directly to the Pakistani government. So a kidnapping is not, in my case, was not as simple asking for money in exchange. It was far more political than that, and I still haven't resolved it, everything that happened. But I do spend a great deal of my life now involved with Afghanistan, with dealing with kidnapping cases and missing Americans. It's part of the missionary in me, I suppose, and one who feels an obligation that my father wanted me to be, and the mission I feel, the desire I feel, the necessity, the obligation, because I survived, to help others out there because there are missing Americans. There are hostages in Afghanistan today. I'm positive of that, even though you don't read about it. And it gives me among other things, purpose in life.
How have you changed from all of this? How has it affected you?
Today, right here with you, I trust you without question. I worry about, I talk about Pakistan, dangerous thing to do. About a month ago, I'll come back to that. About a month ago, a woman I know in New York, a lawyer, went out with a bit 20 years ago, sent me an email. She said, I was in Washington at a cybersecurity conference, event, meeting, something, probably to do with her work. I don't have any idea. And she said, there was a woman there, and she held up your book, and she said, this book I wrote about my kidnapping called Captive. I found Jere. I'm the one we planted with the drone. It was because I figured it out. So some nondescript, some very ordinary looking woman, married or not, lives in some suburb or not, was able to, with her incredible skills, find where I was being kept. They put a drone up there as a result, which changed the dynamic in the room. I was no longer completely alone at the mercy of the man who said, we can do what, sitting next to me, we can do whatever we want to you and no one will find you. That all of a sudden, a drone was up there and my fixer said, can the camera see inside? It gave me a sense of hope, and it gave me a sense, and it gave me power within the Taliban. That I felt that one reason they didn't kill me, I have no idea why ultimately, but because she did that. Not about through, because she was able to do what she did with her linguistic abilities or whatever, however she was able to figure out by tracing phone calls that they were making with my people, with the CBS people or my family or whomever. I have no idea. And then also, about maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago now, if you recall, the U.S., after the Taliban had now in power, the U.S. launched a drone attack and killed Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader, after bin Laden was killed, the leader of the Taliban. And they found him in a house. They traced him by drones, or however the CIA did this, owned by either one member of the Aqanis or someone related to the Aqanis. This group that I lived with in 1981, the Aqani, the Mujahideen, there are 18 of them, all from the same tribe. The leader was Jalaluddin and his younger brother Ibrahim, who was 19 at the time. 5 years later, half of them were dead. And today, the Aqani network, as the U.S. calls it, and its allies, is, with the demise of bin Laden and the family, meaning one of his sons, is that it is, in my view, the most influential, most powerful jihadist group in the world. And Sirajuddin Haqqani, Jalaluddin's son, was military commander of the Taliban. I'm in touch with them today. They're in touch with me. They are, without a doubt, in the center of the Taliban. Powerful force in the world today. We killed the CIA, the Army, whomever launched that drone that killed Ayman al-Zawahiri, also launched a week later, a drone or an attack on a man named Abdul Wali. Abdul Wali was in charge of my kidnapping. Yeah. I never met him, thank goodness. But he was the mastermind, I was told. He was behind it. Yeah. And they killed him with a drone 3 months ago, or shortly after they killed al-Zawahiri. Brought everything back, brings it back right now. Kidnapping doesn't end. And as the MI6 agent said, you have no idea what the ripple effects will be. I've never told that story publicly before, and that's why I cried, I think, the emotion inside. Yeah.
Do you feel in some way that you asked for this? Because of the way you live, because your attraction to adrenaline-filled travel and exploration and journalism and all that kind of stuff? Do you feel like you brought this on yourself?
What happened to me or being here today?
What happened to you in Afghanistan when you were kidnapped?
No one's ever asked me that. Did I bring it on? My answer is, that wells up inside of me is yes. My editor, second book I wrote about my going back to try and find out who kidnapped me and why, used the word suicidal. He said you were practically suicidal, if not suicidal, in what I was doing. Going with the Taliban time and time again, risking everything. I had to do it. I was driven by what I don't know. I didn't know. I just had to do it. I have been living on that edge since I've been living like that since I took that first trip out of college, which was like a religious journey, looking for the God that, a new God to, not the God that I betrayed or had betrayed me. I think that everything that inside of us that's there at childhood does not go away. No, it doesn't go away. I feel that someone said to me the other night, "You've devoted your life to Afghanistan." I didn't like to hear that. But there's truth in that. You can feel you control life, or you can feel that you are led. I felt that in that prison, I did all I could instinctively, without any background, to stay alive. And I don't feel one bit of regret. I feel I did everything, and I hate to even talk this way, I feel I did everything right in that prison to stay alive and to not betray myself, my family, or to show weakness. Yeah, I do. Once I got out, that's a completely different story. The PTSD doctor that the FBI put on me, 2 years of nothing of which, well, a few things were good, but it was a very, very difficult time. here it is now, since 2008, so much time has passed. Yet, as I sit here and talk to you, I am I'm still very deeply involved in Afghanistan. And I'm still, what I'm trying to do now at my age,
How old are you now?
I'm in my 70s, I'm 77.
You're 77?
Yeah. I still run, I still take time. I've had heart operation, which one doctor said was a result of the stress, or implied. Doctors really don't tell you exactly, or maybe they don't know. Yeah, I've had open heart surgery. I run to the degree that I can run, train. And I'm still involved very much in Afghanistan. Contact with the Haqqanis, none of which I've asked for. Everything has come to me. It's as if it's a combination of being led, or it's a combination of being led. Because it's, oh, I want to do this. No. I do other things, but Afghanistan is still very much a part of my life, and I'm taking enormous risks. I do. I take risks now. But I try not to be foolish. I was really playing with fire the last time. But I thought I could do it, because every time the Taliban kept their word until they didn't, and I feel I was betrayed by people around me and people behind them. I don't for 1 minute support the Taliban. No, not at all. But I also realize that the United States and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, in our world, in our desire, America's desire, to move the war against communism from Vietnam to Afghanistan, which we did after the last American soldier was killed, he was a Marine, in 1973. And we, with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, began to, we began to, and this is borne out in books written by American officials, we began to use the Mujahideen to lure the Soviet Union into Afghanistan to pay them back for helping the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong against us in Vietnam in our war against, in our crusade against communism. And that and I became very much involved in that, And then after I came back, I was involved with the government. Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the head of the peace talks, and I created, he was far more in charge than I, but they used my name and because of my publicity in the New York Times. And as the only first person in Afghanistan to create what was called Friends of Afghanistan. It was overseen by the National Security Council and the State Department, all in our war against communism. This was during the Reagan administration, and I was involved in that. And I was there, I did it to help the women and children, and because I was also asked very, very much by the Mujahideen to do something to shoot down the Soviet helicopters. And so I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times precisely doing that, calling on the US to do that, knowing full well it was going to cause more Soviet bombers and more Soviet troops in Afghanistan. But I felt an obligation to the people. I became part of that effort. And I wanted to move away from that. And when I left all of that, and I worked for National Geographic, and they sent me far away places and fantastic exploration projects. And I pushed it in every single one of those projects. To find the source of the Amazon, to find the source of the Brahmaputra in Western Tibet. Pushing everything, never finding anything that satisfied or what I felt in Afghanistan. I kept looking for it. I needed more. It wasn't until I ended up fighting my own war in that prison with the Taliban, there was a sense of survival, of accomplishment, but still it goes on. That what I'm doing today is still very much, and I'm taking risks today. Yeah, I am.
You're going to Afghanistan in a week.
2 weeks, I think. It's too bad. I'm waiting for the phone call. And
Before, I don't want to take you off topic, but I've heard so many people, Lauren, my friend Lauren included, say such wonderful things about Afghanistan.
oh yes, oh yes. There's something about and soldiers will tell you this, and American service people, men and women, Marines, Air Force people, they'll tell you how there's a warmth and there's this sense of Afghanistan. I've never seen it anywhere, how welcoming they are. No other country have I ever been in have people inviting me into their home constantly and they'll give you if they don't have enough food for themselves, they'll give you what they have. They'll give you what they have. There's a sense of warmth and hospitality that is marvelous. Part of it is very much of it is part of, it's called Malmastia in Pashto. It's part of their ancient culture, and it was the romance, of course, of camel caravans and as if it's the Middle Ages in some ways, and the warmth and hospitality and generosity of those people that drew so many, if you will, for lack of a better word, hippies to Afghanistan in the 1980s, or in the 70s, excuse me. And there's so many people who love Afghanistan. It's almost unique in the world. Now because of the Arabization of the war, it's a much more violent place. It's a much more difficult place. And that's why we have a Taliban problem, particularly as regards to girls. And that's just one reason why I'm going back, because it's hostage work, but also, they become far more, without getting into too deeply into this, Wahhabism, which is the most rigid, radical form of Islam, which comes from Saudi Arabia, which until recently, women could not even drive and they had to be covered. All of that, which came with Al-Qaeda, what became Al-Qaeda, is all the Arabization of Afghanistan. And it's changed it completely. It's a completely destroyed culture. And it has to, I don't know how they're going to change, but that good part is still there. It's a very romantic, wonderful, lovely, fascinating place, but you shouldn't spend your life. What did Lawrence of Arabia say about his book? It's a Yahoo existence to exist for others. So it's not for others, you do it for yourself. Everything, ultimately you do it because of yourself. Why am I going there? Why are you doing what you do? You do it for what it gives you. All that you're doing and how compassionate you are and how you're helping others, and the joy that you have that we've talked about, and the happiness. I grew up, I remember one final thing is, when I was a boy, I used to take a horse, and I'd go down along the river. We had two, along the Columbia River, and I would ride as fast as I could. And I always wanted, there's a part of me growing up in the Northwest, it came from my father, he said, always, when you talk to an Indian, there are Indian tribes around us, always ask the name of his tribe. They're proud of their tribe. And I remember when I lived with the Akanis, with Jalaluddin, there's a part of me that wanted to be an Indian, not a cowboy as a boy. It's very much a part of this. And I remember when he took me one day, they took me way up into the mountains to an arms cache. And he and I raced horses back. And I remember looking over at him, this Mujahideen commander, beard, turban, Kalashnikov. We were racing as fast as we could across the plains, and it was everything I dreamt about as a boy. I wanted to be an Indian and ride with. It was a sense of freedom. That's what it gave me. And I felt that with with the Haqqanis, who are an extremely powerful, lethal jihadist group. I realize that. But yeah, there's a warmth there that I loved, and it goes back to my childhood. Riding like an Indian across the plains. No one has ever brought that out. Good job, thanks.
Jere, what an incredible thing you've been through. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Mark. I wouldn't have done it without. I wouldn't have done this like this without you.
Good luck in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Maybe I'll see you there sometime.
You might.